Here's an example of the red herring logical fallacy. Sometimes when people get into a talk with you, they really can't defend their point, or they try to knock down one of your points, but they don't have the knowledge or research to back it up, so they do a red herring. It comes from an old term where they would throw a red herring on the trail of a dog to get the dog to chase something else. So here today is my example. I'm talking about the importance of CO2 and oxygen concentrations for human health. This person doesn't agree with me, so they brought up the point about a submarine. Submarines operate at 5,000 parts per million CO2 until very recently with the introduction of new technology. Okay, fine. What does that mean though? The military puts military members at danger all the time. They probably have to sign a waiver talking about that. Also, on a submarine, you have certain types of things where you don't have to do decision making. Everything is structured. So the cognition and problem solving of say working in like an office or somewhere else is different. So maybe there's a reason why they have higher CO2 on there. You can't just throw out a fact that happens to be true or not and have that be a termination of the argument just because you found out that there's 500 parts per million of CO2 on a submarine. Because one of the reasons the submarine uses lower amounts of oxygen is to reduce the fire risk overall inside of the structure. It's the risk of spreading fires. But there is oxygen available for the crew. They convert seawater into oxygen with special oxygen generators, and they have tanks on board, and they monitor each other. They have strict monitoring, and they have training on how to breathe and how to keep the oxygen concentration in their body where it needs to be. So just throwing out a random fact that you grabbed off of the top Google search about 5,000 to 7,000 parts per million on submarines, that doesn't mean anything. It really has nothing to do with the conversation of houses being filled with more and more dogs. You're just using this thought termination type of logic to try to prove yourself right and prove the other person wrong. And really, what you've done is exposed yourself for not having any knowledge. But if you want to red herring me and try to direct the conversation towards submarines, perhaps you should have a little bit more knowledge than your top Google search where you found that 5 to 7,000 parts per million of CO2 on a sub are okay. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay because many submarine people that are deployed for longer times end up having health effects. Some are not necessarily bad, but some are bad. And it's because being in a low oxygen situations changes the way that your cells work. It changes the mitochondria in your cell. There's plenty of studies about it. And it's not just on submarines. In general, your body can make changes for low oxygen levels. But in the long term, many of those changes can be detrimental. And there's many published studies about being on a submarine has caused interesting health effects, long-term effects, and other things from being on a submarine. And as far as your general point about, well, the submarines do it, so it's okay for people in their house, that doesn't mean anything. If we go back a couple decades or so to the nuclear submarines, somebody could have made that point back then. Oh, people in submarines live right next to nuclear reactors, you're good to go. But, they had problems too from being around the nuclear waste and the radiation. So this whole little attitude of, well, people on the submarine do it, so yeah, that's just a logical fallacy, and it's ridiculous. But actually, you know what? Thank you for bringing up the submarine thing, because now that you mention it, I think I will have a look at some of these changes that people's body go through after having exposure to a high CO2 on the submarine, just like you said. So yeah, thanks. That was a pretty stupid logical fallacy trick you tried to play on me, but thanks, buddy. And as far as your commenting on the 5 to 7,000 parts per million, go ahead and read this article. I'll put it up. I already mentioned it in a previous video. And keep in mind, this article is old. So this is not new research. 5,000 parts per million can cause effects on human health. However, new research suggests levels as low as 1,000 parts per million if exposure lasts for a few hours. So your whole comment and logical fallacy about the submarine is ridiculous, and it shows you haven't done a simple look around. And this article that I'm showing you here collects information from several studies that you can go and look at separately. So nice logical fallacy there, bud. But thanks though. See y'all later.